It's Jeff Breedlove with the American Addiction Recovery Association, and I'm with my partner, Coach Scott Cochran, and we are in conversation with our friend Thomas Wolf from San Francisco today. Coach, say hello to everybody.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Real talk, baby. Real talk today. Real talk about addiction and recovery. That's what I want to talk about. That's why we're here today. So let's get after it, baby.
Tom, thank you for joining us from California. You have been a champion across the virtual space and on the ground in San Francisco, and frankly, internationally, going to international conferences, talking about the addiction epidemic. I know you're our brother in recovery. Just want to let you introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll get into some great policy conversations on the addiction epidemic.
Great. Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Coach, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful. My name is Tom Wolf. I'm a recovery advocate based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am in recovery from addiction. I'm a recovering heroin and fentanyl addict. I was homeless on the streets of San Francisco in 2018 for about 6 months, living with my addiction. My addiction started after foot surgery in early 2015. I was prescribed oxycodone for the pain. I didn't use those pills as directed. Over the next 18 months, my addiction grew to 560 milligrams of oxycodone every single day. The levee broke when my wife found out our house was being foreclosed on because I'd stopped paying the mortgage to use money for drugs, which is actually more common than people realize for people struggling with addiction. That ended me up in a situation where she had slapped a restraining order on me because I was using around my kids and driving my kids around high, things like that. And I ended up out on the streets for 6 months. And it wasn't until I started getting arrested for the crimes I was committing on the street. I was a mule for the drug dealers. I was holding drugs for them on the street and they would pay me in heroin. That's how I was able to maintain my addiction. I was shoplifting, all of those things that we addicts do. We lie, cheat, and steal, as you know. That's part of the deal when you're struggling. And I ended up finally, after my 6th arrest, spending 3 months in county jail where I sobered up. And I was given a choice. I could either continue to sit in jail, return back to homelessness, or go to a 6-month residential treatment program at the Salvation Army. And they were the only ones that would take me because they were free. No one was going to pay a dime for me to go to rehab after all the damage I had done. So I went to that program where I found recovery, I found my faith, and I've been clean and sober now for nearly 7.5 years. A few years ago, after a lot of counseling and hard work and recovery, I reconciled with my wife and kids. So I'm back home with them.
Let's go.
Yeah, my family's thriving. My daughter is in her first year of college down in Los Angeles. She's doing great. And we, as a family, are living in recovery. It's not just me. So when I came home, the understanding was all of us were going to go forward together, living in the principles of recovery. And that includes kind of a renewed faith. And so we now are a family with a strong faith, and we're very open and honest with each other. I don't hide anything about my addiction to my kids because they lived through it too. So we can't pretend that it didn't happen because it did. And
I think we all have that in common. All three of us have that.
And so now, and then I basically became an advocate by accident. Back in 2018, when they would arrest you in San Francisco Police Department had a Twitter account that would post your mugshot on Twitter. So my mugshot's still on Twitter somewhere out there. And I was looking for a job. And if you Googled my name at the time, Tom Wolf, San Francisco, the only thing that would come up is that mugshot, and no one's going to hire me. So I responded to that tweet saying I'm now in recovery. At the time, I had 8 months. I said, I'm 8 months clean and sober. Thank you, SFPD and Salvation Army, for helping to save my life. And that tweet went viral on Twitter, and it got reposted on Reddit, and it was the 3rd most viewed Reddit post in the world that day for whatever reason. And that kind of launched my advocacy. So I just decided to keep talking about my experience and talking about what's wrong, why we need to change our policies. Why is it that this radicalized interpretation of harm reduction has taken hold under this social justice framework and has actually caused more harm than good for people struggling with addiction, and why addiction plays a much bigger part in homelessness than people will admit, including politicians at the highest level. They won't admit it. And if you do say something, you get branded as a MAGA or right wing. And out here in San Francisco, that's bad because it's San Francisco, right? We're the left coast, right? So
Yeah.
I've worked really hard to kind of build this advocacy where I'm kind of walking the center on this, where it's like I acknowledge that there are tools within harm reduction that can be helpful, but our overall policy has to be recovery. Accountability is one of the cornerstones of recovery. We need to roll back many of these criminal justice reforms that have contributed to the chaos that we see on our streets. That homelessness is way more than a housing issue. It's a drug problem primarily. And I keep showing people and providing people with evidence, and that's the key to my advocacy. It's not just me talking. I bring the data. I bring the hardcore data. I'm beating them at their own game out here. And so now in San Francisco, I've become the voice of recovery out here. And my advocacy has gone, international. I was just in Budapest, Hungary at a conference on the global drug epidemic. And I do speaking engagements around the country. I'll be in Tampa, Florida in a few months. I'm going to Washington, D.C. next week to meet with senior advisors in D.C. about the fentanyl crisis. And I'll talk to anyone who will listen, Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter. Conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter. Homelessness and the drug crisis is everyone's problem, and we need to work together to find solutions.
No, you're right. And, when I tried to outrun my disease, God took me out west, and I was working in politics, and I would get a job, lose a job. But one of the stops was in Sacramento, and my brother-in-law at the time lived in Santa Clara. So we would go to San Francisco quite a bit. I mean, I wasn't using every day at that point. And my wife and I, this was in 99 and 2000 and 2001. So, I mean, it's been 20 years. But, we would go to San Francisco as sort of day visitors. And it's such a beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities in the whole world. And just a great American treasure with great diversity and great culture. And to see from 3,000 miles away what's happened in this beautiful, they call it the city because it is the city in many ways.
Right.
Walk us through a little bit about, and I know it goes all up and down the West Coast, really from, I guess, technically San Diego, but all the way up through Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. Tell everybody in parts of the country that don't live on the West Coast, what is going on there beyond what we see on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook? I mean, what's the state of the epidemic right now?
So the state of the epidemic right now, okay, so specifically in San Francisco, we're starting to turn a corner a little bit. Things are turning around. We elected a moderate as our mayor last year, and we have a moderate plurality on our board of supervisors, which is our city council, and they've all embraced recovery and public safety as cornerstones of the administration. Okay, with that has come some performative changes. We passed an ordinance in April of this year that made San Francisco officially a recovery-first city. We rolled back the influence of the harm reductionists that were controlling public health by removing the executive director of public health, who was a radical harm reductionist, and replacing them with a more pragmatic person. So my point is that leadership matters in that regard.
Yeah.
We've had a renewed focus on partnering with the federal government, federal intervention, in that we have DMAC here, or we have Department of Justice working hand in hand with SFPD, and they've been here for a couple of years now to do targeted busts on the street of organized drug dealers. And most of the drug dealers out here in San Francisco are undocumented or illegal immigrants from Honduras that come up here and sell drugs. They're all fueled by the Sinaloa cartel, which controls the majority of the drug market from San Diego to Anchorage, Alaska, along the left coast. So we've taken some steps in the right direction. San Francisco funded and opened its first clean and sober shelter ever a couple of months ago in San Francisco, run by the Salvation Army. All the critics said, no one's going to go there and it's going to stay empty. It's not only full, but there's a waiting list, because if you just ask people that are on the street to put the dope down, they'll actually put the dope down if you incentivize them to put the dope down. So incentives doesn't always have to mean you have to go to jail. It can be like, hey man, we can give you a safe, clean space with a bed and a shower and food and services. All you got to do is put that meth down and ask us for help, and we'll help you. And it's working. And so we're turning a corner, okay? Do we still have a long way to go? Yes. Are there still 8,000 homeless people in San Francisco? Yes. Now, with that said, Los Angeles, is a shit show. Excuse my language. I'm sorry. It is. There are currently 47,000 people homeless in the city of Los Angeles. The county of Los Angeles has 74,000 homeless. Most of them, according to a 2019, so we're going back 6 years. In 2019, UCLA did a study saying that 78% of them had co-occurring disorders of addiction or mental illness or both. So 74,000 people, 80% of them struggling with addiction or untreated mental illness, and they want to just say it's a housing crisis? Now, are there shreds of truth that there's a housing crisis on the West Coast? Yeah, rent's really expensive here. But let me tell you something. When you get down to the street where you're living in a tent, the cost of rent isn't your problem anymore. The problem is now drug addiction. Yeah. And that has to be addressed first before you can actually recover. And San Francisco is waking up to that fact. Unfortunately, LA and Seattle and Portland have not. In fact, Seattle just elected a very, very progressive mayor-elect. So the city's tacking back to the left again. And in regards to this type of stuff, homelessness, drugs, crime, progressive policy absolutely fails unless you have a modicum of public safety. And they are refusing to embrace the idea of public safety, with the exception of, San Francisco and San Jose and a few other cities in California. Pretty much everyone else has kind of sworn that off, and now they're paying the price.
Coach?
No, my question is, so when you say they have a progressive, someone was elected progressive, are you saying that their answer is to throw the wrong type of information out, throw, their care isn't enough? Or what is the difference that you're seeing is what I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So look, a progressive mindset around this issue is based under a social justice framework where we don't need any type of policing or accountability to address this issue. Everything is solved by affordable housing and wraparound services. Yeah. Problem with that is the way that the law is written, even at the federal level, and this is what HUD has been trying to change, is that those wraparound services are voluntary, which means that once you sign a lease and you move in off the street into an apartment and you have a drug addiction, there's no requirement for you to do anything other than pay your rent and your utilities. So you just moved your addiction inside. And for those of us in recovery, we know that the worst thing you can do to an addict is isolate them. Right. And that's exactly what has happened. And in San Francisco, we now have the data to prove it. 30% of all overdose deaths in our city, and we average 650 a year in San Francisco, 30% of them die inside permanent supportive housing for the homeless. At least. It might be more than that. And 70% of all overdose deaths now happen at a fixed address in San Francisco. So we basically took the problem, moved it inside, except it didn't solve the problem outside because there's so many people using. You now have people using drugs inside and outside, and it's created a gigantic, very, very expensive mess. San Francisco spends, between its behavioral health and homeless services, over $1 billion a year on homelessness. LA spends $1.5 billion a year just through their homeless services agency on homelessness. And the problem remains static in that homelessness has not declined. It may not have increased that much overall at the state level. It has, but in San Francisco, it hasn't gone up or gone down. It's stayed at about 8,000 homeless every year now for the last 5 years.
Do you think that this is as simple as the old Adam, follow the money? Or is something else going on? Is it driven by honest philosophy? Because it seems to me, and this is one of the things for the American Addiction Recovery Association that we have said since we began, is that we believe that there's 10% of folks on the far right whose answer is to lock them up, throw away the key, and that extreme doesn't work anymore. And there's 10% on the far left who say no accountability for anybody, nobody ever goes to prison for any reason whatsoever, just nothing. We don't believe that far extreme works either, that there's 80% in the middle that want a bipartisan, common sense solution that involves families and people with lived experience and all that. And we think it's important that leaders like you speak out for that 80% in the middle. But what I want to know is, there's so much money involved. Is this just where people have been blinded and they just want their account and they just want money and they're willing to sacrifice people? Is it a combination of their honest beliefs and that? I mean, what's driving this almost a cabal out there?
Yeah. So I have two parts to it's a two-part answer to your question. So first of all, I think on the left it's more like 30% want to decriminalize and just have everybody do whatever. And on the
Yeah,
right,
I was being diplomatic with my
no, I
examples.
know, I get it, right? On the right, how can I put it? There is a subset of people on the street that do need to be locked up because they're committing crimes to support their addiction. You have to understand, like, when you're smashing car windows and stealing people's laptops out of their car, how come we've created a two-tier justice system so that if you're a drug addict, you get referred to a diversion program, but if it was you, coach, that did that, you actually have to go to jail. Like, that's not right. And people are starting to realize that. So we need to find that balance. And so I agree with you that the majority of people are in the middle and they want some type of balance in between. In regards to the money, it is an ideological issue primarily that's then underneath fueled by funding and money. So for the last 2 years in California, I was a part of a group that worked on a piece of state legislation that was trying to get the state to fund to use up to 10% of their supportive housing dollars for drug-free recovery housing. Okay. And we had to make multiple concessions, water it down, just to get everybody to yes or neutral. And the hardest people to convince were the housing consultants and the housing activists. And we got them to neutral. And then it got passed by the Senate, the state Senate, and the Assembly, and it went to the governor's desk. And at the very last minute, they went to him and said, "You can't do this. It's going to take 10% of our funding away." And he vetoed the bill. So now we have no recovery housing for people that's funded by the state. So it's absolutely driven by dollars. And the thing is they'll tell you, the housing activists will tell you, there's not enough funding for all this stuff. We don't have enough money to do all this stuff. Well, part of the problem is that in California, like for example, in LA on Skid Row, they just built 2 towers to house the homeless, 2 actual big apartment buildings right on Skid Row. Each apartment inside, it's about 400 to 500 units total between the 2 buildings. Each unit costs $600,000 to build. Okay. So they built it, they spent all that money, they housed 400 to 500 people. That's great. And then you turn around and there's another 10,000 people in a 50-block radius waiting for housing. It's not a sustainable model, yet at the same time, they're so afraid of losing a dollar that they will die on that hill in order to keep it. And then they'll use their ideology, that social justice framework, to actually justify it.
I don't know, Coach. That sounds like to me that there's some folks that are putting certain things ahead of recovery itself.
Right. And I love what you said. So the stuff you're doing in San Francisco, let me ask how the process of that. Are y'all, on the street itself, we went to Kensington Avenue and we saw the xylazine was the drug of choice. And at that time, just a year ago, right? Just, a year ago, that was not really that big everywhere else. Is that the drug of choice right now? Is that the issue? Is it all of them? I see the cocaine boats getting blown up, right? And I'm thinking to myself, is that really a cocaine boat? Is that a fentanyl boat? Is that a xylazine boat, right?
Is it a meth boat? Right.
Is what really is on those boats? We call them a cocaine boat because it's just easy, right? That's just the easy thing to say. But is cocaine making a run back? Is it getting big on the streets now, or is it still fentanyl, heroin, xylazine?
So it's interesting. When I was in Budapest at this conference on the global drug epidemic, there were all these professors from like Brussels and Paris and all that, and they were talking about the biggest drug they have to worry about in Europe is cocaine. So there is a resurgence of cocaine happening over there. And the American delegation, me and Kevin Sabet and a couple other people, were sitting there laughing, like underneath, like covering our mouth laughing, going, hold my beer, because let me talk to you about fentanyl. Okay. So it's like out here on the West Coast, it's fentanyl. We don't have a lot of xylazine out here, thank goodness. But you know that everybody out here is also a polysubstance user. So what we have out here is we have a lot of fentanyl that's being mixed with benzodiazepine, with benzos. So what ends up happening, and this is actually really cruel, is that drug dealer will sell you 1/10 of a gram of fentanyl. It has benzos in it. You use it, and the benzos put you to sleep for 8 to 10 hours. And then you wake up after 8 to 10 hours and now you're in full blown withdrawal from fentanyl because fentanyl metabolizes in your body within about 2 hours, right? Wake up, you're freaking out because you're in withdrawal, pull out the rest of your fentanyl, you take it, and now you take too much and you overdose and you die. That's literally what happens on our streets right now, right? And so it's unconscionable that we don't hold, like, we should be charging all those drug dealers, in my humble opinion, with at least involuntary manslaughter for that, because they know exactly what they're selling. And their argument is that, well, we didn't make them put that in their bodies. It's not our fault. Yeah, but dude, if you weren't here selling that, then we wouldn't have to worry about that. And so,
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, we passed a law in Georgia that was driven by a family who lost their son, and in every case or every testimony, this young man, he was different than the three of us. He wasn't quote unquote in active addiction. He was one of those folks that took a pill one time and died. And he was stressed out and all this stuff. And there was a girl involved. He was nervous, and they went to their state senator, who went to the lieutenant governor, and they introduced a bill earlier this year, and it had two clauses in it. And one clause was going to address people with an amount of product currently under state law, trafficking amount of product. And the other paragraph was going to have anybody with personal consumption amount. So some of us went down there and, advocated, and we got the personal consumption part taken out. And I appreciate that. And said, y'all are rushing too fast on this, but they insisted they were going to leave the trafficking amount in. And I thought that was a pretty good compromise, because, if two friends are together, we got to maybe talk about that a little more before they just do a bill like that. But trafficking is one thing. So it passed bipartisanly, almost unanimously. Basically, there were 2 votes against it in the Senate, 3 votes against it in the House. So this was not a racial thing, not a geographic thing, not a partisan thing. It overwhelmingly passed. We had people who are on the extreme of our own community say, well, that wasn't really a recovery bill, because traffickers are still going to have to go to prison. And I was like, yeah, but we got the language taken out for people just in active addiction, and they're not going to go for 30 years, no questions asked, mandatory minimum. And I think that's part of the common sense that you're leading the way on out there, is how do we get to a consensus among our own community? We could put all the motives aside for a minute. Let's just take everybody at face value. I think fentanyl has been a game changer, xylazine and all the adulterations. And I think it is absurd to suggest if you kill somebody with fentanyl, there's not going to be legal consequences, as it would be to say, let's go to the Capitol and introduce a bill to get rid of DUI laws. Because that's just not going to happen.
yeah.
So, talk to us about how you think we reach a consensus, or maybe we don't, and we just have to form an alliance of, common sense folk in our community.
Well, last November we had an election, obviously the election, right? And in California, there was a ballot proposition called Proposition 36, which was going to roll back certain aspects of all the criminal justice reforms we'd done in California for people that had 3 prior convictions. So if you had 3 prior convictions for shoplifting, you get arrested again for shoplifting, you could be charged with a felony. 3 prior convictions for drug dealing, you could be charged with a felony. But there was a special amendment, or something called Alexander's Law, that was inserted into that bill. And Alexander's Law is a fentanyl admonishment. And what it basically stated was that you have been convicted of selling fentanyl. If you get convicted of selling fentanyl again, and we can trace your fentanyl back to an overdose death, you can be charged with murder or manslaughter. And that passed with 70% of the vote in California. Okay. Obviously, in California, there's still a little bit of common sense left when it comes to drugs and homelessness and crime. People kind of saw that, right? Despite what our state legislature, which was completely against it, our governor was completely against it, it passed overwhelmingly, which sent a message kind of across the bow that, hey, you know what? Accountability has to be part of this process if you want things to work. And I think that was a good pragmatic step for California, right? For as blue as we are, to kind of take that step and say, hey, you're going to sell fentanyl, It is a super deadly drug. We recognize that now. If you sell it and you keep selling it, you could end up being charged with murder. I think that it's really easy to delineate at that point between who's a drug user and who's a drug dealer. And I know that there is some truth in that some people that use drugs also sell drugs. But out here on the West Coast, that's not the case, just so you know. Like in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, the people selling drugs are part of a cartel network where they're not allowed to use their own product. Like that's rule number one. It's like Ice Cube's old rap song, go get high off your own supply, right? If you get caught, using your own supply, you get kicked out of the ring. So it's really easy for us. Like I could walk you down the street in San Francisco right now and be like, okay, Jeff, that's a drug dealer, that's a drug dealer, that's a drug dealer, that's a drug dealer. And you would just know. And so everybody knows who the drug dealers are. It's just about whether or not the question is what are we going to do about it? And for us, it's a two-part question because the majority of our organized drug dealers are also undocumented or illegal immigrants here in California. So I think things like that, Alexander's Law was a good pragmatic step in the right direction that protects drug users, but holds dealers and traffickers accountable.
I love that. That's incredible. That fires me up because I think it's a case by case basis. It's so hard for me to blame a dealer when they're selling fentanyl and the request from the addict is fentanyl, and knowing right, like you're in active addiction and you know that oxy and heroin aren't you don't want those. You want fentanyl. And to put a blanket on anything is bad for me. But to say I'm in active addiction and I'm going to go get fentanyl, I overdose on that, someone has to pay. That is where it's individual. Everybody's got their own say. Everybody's got their own thing because they know what it is. The people know. They know exactly what it is. Now, when you're mixing it with other things, now, like you said, you're basically, if you put it with benzos, you're basically putting them in hell, right? Yeah. Active addiction's hell on earth, right? But if you added the piece that you just said is the worst thing I've ever heard, that's the absolute worst and makes me sick. But I think all of these, is a case by case basis, and I think people know that. I think at the end of the day, people do know that. But it's sad when it's you to hear of the story of a person just one time, bought one pill for the weekend, went to a bachelor party, whatever, those are awful stories. But to get people off the street and get them clean, right? That's what we're really trying to do, is trying to help the ones that don't even know they want help, help the families too, right? And that's what our organization is all about, is trying to find ways, and that's why having this conversation with you today, is so incredible to open up our eyes, because I wouldn't have known that on the streets that there are real drug dealers, right? I always thought it was the person using it just to stay high, that maybe there's somebody in the back, way back, that's living good and passing it out. But you're saying that they're walking the streets and they're part of the cartel. Yeah, that's scary stuff.
And that's how it is all up and down the West Coast. So look, how can I put it? So in recovery, right? You meet all kinds of people in recovery. And so, the recovery community out here in San Francisco is very large, very loud. It's primarily black led, which is great. A lot of survivors of the crack era. And a lot of people in recovery also used to sell dope, right? And they'll be the first to tell you that selling dope is a high risk, high reward operation, right? Super high reward. One of my best friends used to be a huge dope dealer and a meth addict both at the same time. And he used to drive like a Porsche and had money and all this stuff. But then it's high risk because he ended up like running from the police and went on like a 90-mile chase over the Golden Gate Bridge and ended up spending like 2 years in state prison. That's the risk. So I guess my point is that, look, as long as we have a demand, and this is something we should talk about, drug dealers are going to be there to sell, and it's high potential reward for them because they make money. Drugs aren't free. But there also has to be that high risk of punishment and accountability if you're going to do that, especially with a drug like fentanyl that has killed 300,000 people in the last 3 years in the United States. Like, that's a fact, right? But we've decided to water down the risk part for people under the guise of compassion, under the guise of decriminalization. And I'm sorry, like, if you're going to engage in that kind of behavior, and again, guys, it's about behavior, right? If you're going to engage in that negative behavior and that risky behavior, you also have to be aware and be prepared for the risk. Like, look, I got caught up. I had to do 3 months in county jail. There are people that have done a lot worse stuff than me. I know drug dealers still on the street today that have 7 felony convictions. 7. And they're out there slinging dope right now. Like, come on, man. Like, when is enough enough? So I think there has to be we have to put some guardrails back around organized, especially organized drug dealing, if it can be determined that it's organized, but drug dealing in general. And then we have to go upstream and start talking to kids about prevention and things like that we kind of abandoned after like the early 90s. We kind of, left all that behind. Like, we know maybe, just say no didn't work. And we know that maybe dare maybe didn't work. It just scared kids and all that stuff, whatever. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking to kids about drugs, and not the harm reduction way. Like, these harm reduction, I don't want to use profanity, sorry. These harm reduction folks came to when my son was in junior high school, okay, when he was in 8th grade. They came to his school and they said, hey, we're here to talk to you about drugs. So now, look, guys, we know you're going to use drugs. So here's how to use safely. If you're going to use, meth, here's a meth pipe. If you're going to use fentanyl, we suggest that you don't use a needle, that you use this foil and straw like they gave them. And they gave them all a drug kit with a condom inside. And 8th graders, man. And that's called harm reduction. No, I'm serious. That's California. That's how we roll. Wow. So that to me is not prevention. That you could argue that that's some type of education, but I think what's really the ultimate message? The ultimate message
recruitment. You could argue it's recruitment too.
You could argue that. you could just argue that it's like a surrender, like you're waving the white flag. Right. So like, yeah, you're going to use drugs. My son is now 16. He doesn't use drugs. My daughter's 19. She doesn't use drugs. I mean, she might have an occasion. I mean, she's in college. She's in the sororities. I'm sure she's had a beer. Okay. But she's not smoking fentanyl or meth. Right. You know what I mean?
Tom, let me take you deep on a direct question. And it's about harm reduction. We have a couple of folks in Georgia that I know and love, and I've met folks across the country, and Coach has been to On Point in New York, and I've been down to Miami and Philly and some other places. I appreciate harm reduction. I do. And I think there's a role in the process for harm reduction. But I do think there are elements within that subset of our family that are very, very radical. And I want to make 2 points and see if what you respond to them. One is it's their way or the highway. They want radical harm reduction first. And if you're not for what they're for, then you're not for recovery. And the second thing is they don't seem to have any desire to advocate, to find out what anybody else in the community thinks. They want to be activists and say, this is the premise. To your point, well, you're going to do drugs, so here's all the equipment to do drugs. And it's not like maybe talk to the PTA and the booster club and some parents group and some churches and see, is that the message they want brought to their kids? So how do we address folks within the harm reduction community that are pretty belligerent and aggressive, and if it's not their version of harm reduction, then it's not acceptable? What's the response to those that I think loud minority?
Great question. You have to beat them. You just have to beat them out. You have to beat them at their own game. So one of the things that the radical harm reductionists love to do is they love to cite data and peer-reviewed papers. Okay, so for every peer-reviewed paper that they show you, you have to be ready to come back with a peer-reviewed paper that shows the opposite. They'll show you some kind of peer-reviewed study that says mandated treatment doesn't work. Well, I've got 3 peer-reviewed studies that show mandated treatment has the same success rate as voluntary treatment does. So you have to be able to beat them at their own game with that. And 2, you have to be relentless. If you're going to be all about recovery like you guys are, we have to be all about recovery like all the time. This is my purpose in life now. I live it and I breathe it. It's my identity, a part of what I do. And just like with them, like they're radicalized, and they talk about all this stuff, and that's fine. They can have their voice and everything. And then the next part is a little more complicated. And this is something I found in my travels throughout the country. I would ask them to define harm reduction, because depending on what part of the region of the country that you're in, the definition of harm reduction is going to be different. So in Washington State, the definition of harm reduction to one of those kind of loud, radical harm reductionists would be legalization of all drugs, or at a minimum, decriminalization and supervised consumption sites everywhere, including inside permanent supportive housing for people to use. Safe supply programs where they're giving out Dilaudid, like they do in Canada, to try to replace the fentanyl that's on the street, and recognize and engage with drug dealers on the street, and recognize that they are, in their opinion, the first line of defense in harm reduction, and they're actually your friend, and you should be working with them. In fact, there's an article that was published by the Drug Policy Alliance in 2019 that said that very thing, called Rethinking the Drug Dealer. You should check it out. It'll blow your mind. But then you go to San Antonio, Texas, or Austin, and you talk to a couple of folks down there at Haven for Hope or one of those places, and they'll say, we're a harm reduction facility. Well, what's your definition of harm reduction? You know what they'll tell you? You know what they told me when I was there in October? They were like, well, we don't do the foil straws and pipes here. That's not harm reduction to us. Our harm reduction to us is that the person maybe slips a beer here and there and we're okay with it. Oh, well, that's a lot more palatable to me than handing someone the tools to kill themselves, right? So it really varies from region to region. And that's the thing about harm reduction that's so difficult to tackle, is that they keep moving the goalposts around. It's not even back. They're moving it around over here, over there, over here, of what the definition is of harm reduction. And so it's like a moving target, right?
God,
so
that's such a great point.
So,
oh my God, it's so good. Because the first, yeah, go ahead.
It's really important that we, the recovery community, right, stay on point with our message, and that we don't move our goalposts. We just keep moving forward. That's the goal for us. So they can keep dodging and ducking and diving. At the end of the day, though, our message stays consistent. And then eventually that consistency pays off.
Because the first time I was introduced to this type of place, we went to one and it was very similar. Like, it looked like they were trying to help people get off the street. Like, here's some options. Here's some things we can do to help you. Just keep coming back. We'll give you a towel. Keep coming back. We'll let you use the shower. Keep coming back. And in a year, maybe if they survive, you'll get them into a facility. And then we went to another place and they were, can't go further than this. This is as far as we're letting you in, because on the second floor, something's going on that shouldn't be going on. And I was completely blown away by just my own personal experience, because I had no idea, I had no clue. Jeff decided to throw me in the fire right off. I was a year sober, and he's like, "Hey, come with me. Let's go to Kensington. Let's go."
Oh, man. Sorry, bro.
Welcome to the jungle.
Yeah.
But when I think of
the fire,
when I think of harm reduction, I'm thinking you're trying to make a better situation. You're trying to increase people in the door so that they know this is a safe place when you're ready to get sober. When you're ready, here's a safe place. Not, hey, go do your drugs in the corner, and if you're in there too long, we got Narcan ready. But I just, that's hard to fathom that. That's a safe route. But I like what you're saying. Just I'm in my recruiting phase of my job as a football coach, and it's interesting that we're talking about this stuff because it all relates. Everything relates dealing with human beings, you know.
Tom, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. And I want to ask you this. This whole argument, and I really don't want to bring up people from Canada or anything, but not our friend from Canada, but somebody else. But
it's okay. You can bring them up.
I don't want to give him the air, but there are people out there who just can't buy into recovery first. And I believe deeply it's all about recovery first. I mean, I understand you can't recover if you're 6 feet under, but I think responsible harm reduction is part of recovery. I think treatment's part of recovery. I think prevention's part of recovery. And I think accountability, and I was charged with a felony and made the news, and that was special and everything. I think accountability doesn't have to always be punitive, as you said earlier. But to me, accountability is kind of like an amends. People go, well, I believe in the 12 steps and the principles. Well, so you believe in amends? Oh, yeah. But, well, then, okay. I mean, we don't just get a get out of jail free card or a get out of responsibility free card. So what's been your biggest observation about the difference between embracing a policy that is recovery first versus embracing a policy that puts other philosophies ahead of recovery?
Yeah. So the best answer I can give to that is that the people in harm reduction believe that recovery is too hard. Like they wave the white flag. So the director of San Francisco's largest addiction treatment center has been in long-term recovery from heroin for like 35 years. Okay. She's a doctor. And she and I had a conversation about this. And she looked at me and she said, there are 40 million people struggling with drug addiction in the United States. Almost none of them want to get clean. So we should just support them. And so in her facility, if you relapse in their drug rehab, you don't get kicked out. So now you have a situation where you have people actively using and getting loaded in rehab next to other people trying to be in recovery from addiction. Okay. That's the current situation at San Francisco's largest addiction treatment provider. My response to her was that you've been sober, clean and sober, abstinent for 35 years, and you get to enjoy this sober lifestyle. That's how you became a doctor. You became a doctor in recovery. So it's one of your gifts of recovery. And now you're actually advocating to support people to continue to use drugs. For me personally, and this is just my personal opinion, but I don't care who knows it. If you think that way and you're in recovery, in my opinion, you're kind of a sellout to recovery because you're being hypocritical in that you get to enjoy this abstinence-based lifestyle while you're supporting other people continuing to use a drug that you know has a very high probability of killing them over a very short period of time. We're not talking about alcohol in 30 years. We're talking about fentanyl in 2 years, maybe one hit right off top. Okay, it's a totally different beast. And so I'm really tired of that false equivalence that people keep using with sugar and caffeine as being drugs. And I'm like, does caffeine release 10 times the amount of dopamine in your brain as meth? Of course not. So why are we even having that conversation? Those kinds of things are very disturbing to me, to hear from people that have PhDs and letters after their name that are making policy, which is why people like us, people in lived experience, must demand a seat at the table, not just at the local and state level, but at the federal level when they're making drug policy, which is why I'm going to Washington, D.C., which is why I'll talk to any administration, Republican or Democrat, anybody that will listen, because our voice needs to be heard. The voice of recovery needs to be heard and understood and implemented as part of our drug policy nationally and locally.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to ask one more question and then turn it over to Coach and let him ask you one more real quick. And we'll try to keep this thing in the next 5 minutes. But, that excites me so much, Tom, because that's why Coach and I came together and started AARA. I mean, I worked in Washington. I ran congressional campaigns and I ran congressional offices. And I know a lot of the staff still, and I know a lot of the members. And of course, I'm not going to name the members' names, but I know that we have Democrat and Republican members who are dissatisfied with the way that certain people come to Washington and purport to represent recovery. And it's not consistent. are they asked to meet about recovery and they end up talking about some other social issue. And the staff go, that wasn't what you told us you wanted to talk to our boss about. And it's just not a consistently professional situation. Frankly, the way that Planned Parenthood, they're extremely professional. The NRA is extremely professional. That's the left and the right. You have groups that go up there, they're held in high regard, regardless of their philosophy, because they know how to professionally advocate for what they say they're there to advocate for. And I think it's important that our community have a discussion about what recovery means in the age of fentanyl and adulteration of product, and what we're gonna stand for and accept and what we're not. And I'm so excited to talk to you today, and I appreciate your leadership so much, because I think there is a group of us that are willing to speak up and not let extreme voices define a community anymore. And I just want to say, I guess it's really not a question. I guess I just want to end by saying, thank you for that leadership, and turn it over to Coach.
No, I just want to say thank you also. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for being an advocate, because you taught me some stuff today, and I know our listeners are going to be fired up to hear what you had to say.
Well, thanks, Coach. And Jeff, what you said was like 100% spot on. When I go to DC, and I've been to DC numerous times, met with congressional delegations, U.S. senators. I've been in the White House under Biden's administration to have my 5 minutes of fame talking about recovery and treatment. And it's always the same message. Always the same message. So I think that it's key that, again, we stay consistent. We keep the message about hope. Keep the message that human beings are resilient, that they can recover, and that we need to create every opportunity possible for them to do that. And that harm reduction, in my opinion, is a set of tools, but it makes terrible policy, and we need to make people see that and understand that. And you have to be able to cite examples, so you have to come ready, right? You can't just come in there with just like, I'm a recovery advocate and we need more recovery, and then not have any details. You got to actually have the data to back it up and be able to cite example on all that. And I've worked really hard over the past 5.5, 6 years to be that person, where I can go toe to toe with any politician, any doctor, any psychiatrist, anybody with letters after their name. I will go toe to toe with you on the data and the pharmacology and the whole bit, because that's what it's going to take for a voice in recovery to actually step forward, other than just being a feel-good story. But if you want to make real change, you got to be able to walk the walk too.
Well, Tom, thank you for that. Tell us, everybody, where they can find you on social media.
Primarily, you can find me on X, on Twitter. My handle is at TWolfRecovery. I'd appreciate a follow if you check me out. I'm also on Instagram, TWolfRecovery. So yeah, come see the work that I'm doing. Yeah, some of it's controversial, but hey, it's social media. That's what it's all about. And it's about getting people talking about addiction, recovery, and drug policy and homeless policy, and how it's all intertwined and what we can do better to make it all better for all of us.
Well, Tom, you're a great leader for recovery. Thanks for spending time with Real Talk about Addiction and Recovery with the American Addiction Association, Scott Cochran, Jeff Breedlove. And, we just want to remind everybody to end the whisper. Follow us on social media too. We will see you at the next episode.